All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Atheist Experience. We are live. Today is Sunday, June 11th, 2017. I'm your host, Matt Dillahunty. Joining me this week, Don Baker.
Hey, good to be here.
And all the people on the other side of the glass who you can't hear, but some of them are actually smiling. Okay. So, you know.
Yeah, get some waves.
This is a live program, a live call-in program sponsored by the Atheist Community of Austin, a nonprofit educational organization promoting positive atheism and the separation of church and state, or separation of religion and government if you prefer, which may be better language. As a nonprofit, you can visit the website atheist-community.org to find out more about the ACA, including a calendar of events. We have a monthly lecture series, which was today. And I was the lecturer because we couldn't find anybody worthwhile. So I talked about magic and skepticism, did a couple magic tricks, talked a little bit about getting magicians involved in testing paranormal and supernatural claims because they are the experts in deception. Not that everybody who makes a paranormal claim is attempting to deceive you. They may themselves be deceived, and it's all worth investigating. You can also donate and contribute to the ACA. There'll be a link, a donate link as well. There's also the Sunday morning brunch at Cafe Express when we don't have the lecture series. Mm-hmm. I know the Bat Cruise is coming up in September. I don't know if it's sold out yet, but the information is available there at the website as well. You can also go to atheist-experience.com, which will be a jarring experience for them if you went directly from Atheist-Community, because we haven't updated that webpage yet. It's on the to-do list, but you can find out more information about the program, including how to call. Now, the number is right there below Don, 1-512-686-0279. And there's also instructions on how you can use your voice over IP stuff on your computer. There's a video there to explain how to do it. And after the show's over, we get together for dinner at Star of India Restaurant, 2900 West Anderson Lane. We're on the air until about 6 p.m. Central. Any atheist or atheist-friendly person's welcome to come down and join us. It's a buffet thing, so you can eat, not eat. You can have a drink. You can visit with with people involved in the show. And we'll see you there. I don't know was there other announcement that?
Not that I know of, no.
You don't have anything to tell everybody?
No, not today.
Okay. I don't have anything else. Actually, I do have something else.
Okay.
My schedule of events is up at mattdillahunty.com. That's not what this is about. You can find out where I'm going to be and what I'm doing. But I wanted to let everybody know that from about the 8th or 9th of July until September, I'm traveling doing a bunch of events. So it's very likely that I won't be on the show much at all, maybe 1 or 2 weekends in that entire time frame. I just didn't want anybody to think I, ran away and left the show. I just have other things on my plate, and I don't need to be here every week. There's a bevy of hosts and co-hosts who are great to listen to and educate, and I'm...
Different voices, good thing.
Yeah, and the nice thing is that, it's not this homogenous group mind, there's disagreement and stuff like that, and so I appreciate that.
Yeah, we get to see some of the disagreements between us and these sorts of things.
Because we like things to be different on occasion.
Right.
Which, by the way, Don, for your topic today, is it different, or is it another failure of Christianity?
Well, I'm on this kick, and I'm up to the 48th episode of Failures, and this is a failure show. And today's topic is called the soul silliness. And the idea here is that every question you could ask about a soul leads to confusion and nonsense answers. What is a soul? Do animals have souls? When and how does it enter the body? When and how does it leave? What do souls do? Pretty much any claim I make today has believers that believe those claims, and then there's a whole bunch of other people that believe the opposite. And the reason is that there's no objective reality in which to test these claims and arrive at a conclusion where everybody can agree on the answer. So you get this whole Wild West idea of different beliefs.
That would seem to be a problem.
Yes, that's a problem.
If, everybody has a different idea of the soul, why hasn't God cleared this up?
That's right. And the atheist answer is there appears to be no higher authority to which you can appeal. So James D. has done a really great lecture on the soul, and I don't want to go over that stuff again. You've done some work on the soul, and there's just a lot to say and a lot of confusion. The word soul in the Bible is a translation of the Hebrew word nephesh and the Greek word psyche. and Hebrew word literally means a creature that breathes, and a Greek word means a living being. So there's a lot of early association with breath, your aspiration, your when you die, you expire, which is also a breath thing. You stop breathing. And
they didn't count children. You know, you weren't counted until you took your first breath, and then a month after that. By the way, I don't know if it's on YouTube, but Aaron Ra has also done a thing where he looks at the idea of breath and wind, and how this forms a trend going through religions and gods. It's a fascinating look, even if it's not
cool.
correct. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a very ancient idea, and the biblical references to the soul are related to the concept of breath mostly, and establish no distinction between the ethereal soul and the corporal body. There doesn't seem to be a big difference between the two. And the idea of a soul being immortal is really an older Greek idea, and some think it should be biblically rejected. Colossians 2:8 says, "Look that no one takes you captive by means of a philosophy and empty deception according to human tradition." So this is from the Jehovah's Witnesses, would reject the idea of a soul separate from the body. Spirit seems to have grown out of the ancient idea of joining the ancestors, where you want to go, commune with the ancestors. And most primitive religions have an idea of spirit or ghosts, and they can look out for you and they can guide you, or they can play pranks on you, and, hide your keys or whatever. A nice thing about a soul is maybe you get to escape death, and that's a very appealing thing, and maybe you get to see your loved ones again. And these ideas are, I think, comforting, and they play into the wishful thinking that, hey, I get to have all these, you have my cake and eat it too, but there's really no evidence for it. So do animals have soul? Well, if we're talking about breath, then yes, they do have a soul, but it makes no sense to try to manipulate animals with the promise of reward or the threat of torment. Only humans are gullible enough to be conned, and presumably babies have souls, so what becomes of them when they die? Either they, have eternal torture, or they get a free pass to heaven, and either way, it leads you down the path to unsettling nonsense. Mm-hmm. And so there's this rationalization in Christianity that only humans have souls that are immortal, and we'll just brush that children thing under the rug and not talk about it. When and how does the soul enter the body? Well, if the soul is breath, then of course after your birth, and it's caused by the slap of the doctor or the midwife's hand on the baby's bottom to get it to start breathing. But that doesn't leave much room for religion. If the soul enters the body at conception, then that raises all sorts of concerns about what happens about the souls of identical twins, because twinning happens after conception, or chimera babies that are multiple embryos joined together in a single person, or even clones. All of these things raise some very thorny questions for the soul concept. And I personally think the whole cloning idea has been, put on the back shelf, because it really does raise a lot of soul questions, and it brings a lot of attention, negative attention, I think, to the idea of a soul.
I think the cloning goes beyond that as well. I agree with you that the soul is a part of it, but it does get to issues of identity, lots of ethical issues. What makes the measure of a man or the measure of a human being?
Right. Is it really human?
Even if there's no soul, we've got a lot of stuff to sort out there.
Mm-hmm. Right. Absolutely. And a very telling thing, and I talked about this in an earlier episode, is in vitro fertilization. Christianity got very crazy about that because we were having conception outside the human body, and eventually they settled down and thought it was okay because IVF was making a lot of Christian babies, and so a lot of couples that pay for that sort of service are Christian, and so. Anyway, but that's...
And then we allowed for same-sex marriage and same-sex adoption, and all of a sudden, IVF becomes a viable path for lesbians to take your babies away from you, or create their own babies.
Create their own babies. Oh no. Well, if the soul enters the body after conception, then an omniscient God would presumably know when to crawl up your mother's uterus and put the soul in, and do it after there was any threat of abortion. So abortion's okay, right? Or after child death or something, or after any thought of child death. So anyway, no matter how you slice it, gets a little messy. What does the soul do? Well, if somebody's going to judge and torture a soul, presumably it's the hub of moral thought and responsibility. But there's this problem about memory, that maybe you've forgotten a lot of your memories. Maybe you have Alzheimer's or something, and you've lost your mind, or maybe you've had a brain injury. And if you don't have your memories, what sense does it make to punish you for stuff you've done that you can't even remember? Or if you're not mentally very capable, does it make sense to punish you for things that you don't understand? There's the question of, do souls have free will? And that's another rabbit hole to go down. Where do they live? Well, maybe they haunt old houses. I'm not sure. There's all sorts of variations on the soul. We can have immortality of the past. So maybe souls get to have, finite rides in human bodies, but they live forever, both in the past and in the future. In which case, does the judgment really make sense there? There's this idea of reincarnation, which is not a Christian idea, but why not? It's just another variation. Are there a finite number of souls? Well, how many are there? And how many have there been? And these sorts of things. You can have souls knocking around outside your body, and maybe that's astral projection. That's kind of a New Agey idea. You can have your souls knocking around after death. You can have ghosts and possessions, and you can find your soulmate by finding your true love and these sorts of things. So even sex in heaven, you can have souls having sex. So that's all sorts of crazy stuff that various people have proposed, and some people believe very strongly. And what are you going to do for immortality, with your immortality? Are you going to play harps? Are you going to praise God for the entire time? Or are you going to haunt creepy old houses? What about those 72 virgins that are promised to martyrs of Allah? Did they get to regenerate or what? Anyway, so I just tried to scratch the surface here that pretty much any question you ask is going to lead you down a rabbit hole and raise a lot of questions, and there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of consistency. Functionally, the soul is a mechanism for manipulation, in my opinion. It's a reward, a pretend reward or a claim of a reward for following the rules. And it's a means to punish those who seemingly don't follow the rules. And it gives a false sense of justice for the evil in the world, that you can presumably make believe that these people are going to go get their just reward in the afterlife. But in reality, that's not what happens. What happens is they have to be punished or dealt with in this life. And so there's no consistency or sense to the idea of the soul. It needs to be exactly that thing that will sell whatever religion. And that's a failure of Christianity and other religions.
And maybe today, if we get some theist callers, perhaps we'll find some people who
get some clarification
believe in the soul, and they can tell us what they believe about a soul and why.
Yeah, sounds great.
We're going to start taking callers. I notice the lines are filled up, but we lost a couple theists, but it looks like some more are calling in. As a reminder, if you don't get through on the show today, you can also email tv@atheist-community.org. That goes to myself and Don and all the hosts and co-hosts and some of the people behind the scenes. We had some calls that were screened prior to the show that just wouldn't have been good for the show. If you're calling in to find out like technical details about the show or how you could set up your own podcast, just email. There's plenty of behind the scenes folks who'd be happy to give you that information. And maybe we put up one quick video where I toured the new studio and showed some of the stuff, but we haven't done technical instructions. Maybe we'll do something like that. And
of all the things that this show is improving and all the time, every time I come, there's new additions and new features and new smoothing this rough edge out, and it's just turned into a very professional production.
And that's because of the guys on the other side, whose names you will see at the end, who actually do the real work, and we just show up and talk.
Yeah, they're the heroes of the show for sure.
All right, so we'll go ahead and get started with Robert in Pensacola. Thanks for waiting.
Thank you for letting me on.
Sure, you're on the air.
And I want to thank you for raising the term compatibilist.
Yeah.
I never heard of it before. I was very suspicious when I heard it. Fancy schmancy term.
Yeah.
Looked it up. And
Is that a Dan Dennett term?
Yeah, so for those who aren't familiar, compatibilists, it relates to the idea of free will, about whether or not free will is in conflict with the idea of determinism. And Dan Dennett argues on behalf of compatibilism, the idea that free will, under his definition, isn't incompatible with determinism. Plus, we don't necessarily live in a purely hard deterministic universe in the first place. Dan's got a couple of great books on the subject, Elbow Room, Freedom Evolves, and Consciousness Explained, all of which delve into this to different degrees. But I think Elbow Room, which has the subtitle, The Varieties of Free Will Worth Wanting, is probably the best one on the subject to kind of get a look at compatibilist ideas about free will.
Oh, well, I was hoping that you could inform me on this, because I think it's just trash.
Oh. Well, I don't know. I don't know what to do, because I don't know. We'd have to define terms and figure out what it is that you're talking about. What part of it is it that you think is trash? I mean, do you think we have free will, and what do you mean by free will?
No, I do not.
Okay. Well, under most notions of free will, most libertarian notions of free will, the idea that you could do otherwise in ways that might violate natural law, I don't think we have free will either. But I do think that we have something that's worth calling free will, partly because it's something that we care about. And so the easiest way I can describe what I'm talking about, which doesn't violate the physical laws of the universe and doesn't appeal to anything magical, is Don, could get up and walk out of the room right now, or I could drag Don out of the room when he doesn't want to leave. The difference between those two scenarios, even though in both of them he ends up out of the room, but the difference between those two is what we're going to call free will. This doesn't mean that you could have violated the natural order or anything like that. It is a way of recognizing that there are thinking agents who interact, and that you have this meat sack that I am has some desires, and those can come in conflict with others. And under that model, then we can hold me responsible for dragging Don out, or hold Don responsible for walking himself out. And that's primarily what we care about when we talk about free will.
Well, why call that free will? That's not what the Christians say. That's not what the Muslims say.
Yes.
That's not what the Mormons say.
Yeah, and I don't care, because I reject their notions of free will. What Dennett is talking about is what people have cared about forever. And that is, hey, if there's no free will, how can you possibly hold anybody responsible for anything? And what he's saying is, all the things that you care about, which is why the subtitle was The Varieties of Free Will Worth Wanting. Trust me, I am reluctant to speak on behalf of Dan. We've only traded a couple emails. I hope to have a conversation with him about this at some point. But what he's essentially saying, to my understanding, is we care about being able to hold agents responsible in relation to their understanding of the consequences of their actions and the moral evaluation of those. And we can, because I'm a thinking agent who either dragged Don out or he got up and walked out on his own. And apart from that, all the things that most religions talk about with regard to free will is magical thinking garbage that I don't think is real and have no use for.
Yeah, if you're going to redefine free will that way, basically you're saying free will as the religions use it is wrong.
Yes, libertarian free will is
okay,
nonsense.
But I've also heard you say, when, say, somebody says they believe in a Spinoza God, you say, why bother?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm saying, why bother to go through all this?
So why bother? I just explained why bother. Because the notions of free will have spawned a bunch of fear of, if you're not the thinking agent, willful agent that we thought you were and were taught by religions, then we can't hold anybody responsible. And so,
what do you mean by responsible? Do you mean punish them?
Punish, rehabilitate, whatever. The fear is that if I club Don over the head,
and I'm feeling like a United Airlines passenger.
If we've gotten rid of the traditional notions of free will, then by what justification do you hold me responsible? Because I didn't have any control over whether I hit him over the head. And that's the sort of thing that Dennett is addressing.
the trouble is that this is the reason that free will is around in these religions is it's a mechanism for punishment. If that disappears, then punishment disappears.
No, it doesn't. If you get rid of one mechanism for punishment, does that mean punishment disappears?
Well, you don't have a good excuse for punishing.
Sure, we do. I'm still the same.
Why?
I'm still the same. I'm still the same thinking agent when I clubbed him over the head, whether I have free will or not. And we as a society need to do something about that. Now, whether it is punishment, incarceration, rehabilitation, finding out what went wrong in my head, those are questions about how to deal with it after the fact. But setting that aside, we still recognize that I am the one who did this, and therefore we as a society can take reasonable action.
And we don't need religion for that.
Yeah.
Well, that's true. That's very true. But as far as moral responsibility, we don't need free will to give us moral responsibility.
Well, it depends on how you want to define free will. But I mean, all we do is we look at we try to hold people responsible in proportion to their capacity to understand free will. Like if a 2-year-old kicks me in the shin, we may have good reason to think that they're not quite aware of the impact of that actions, that they don't have the sort of robust moral thinking. Whereas if Don kicked me in the shin,
Different thing altogether.
it's a different kettle of fish.
So you're saying that because of free will, he is morally responsible?
No, I'm saying because of his capacity to understand the consequences of his actions and as an agent to take them, whether you think he took it under a libertarian notion of free will or under a compatibilist notion of free will or without any free will at all, it's fundamentally the same, that we can still hold him responsible.
We're going to probably put him in jail if he hits you too hard, just because he can't be trusted.
I'll forgive him.
Okay, well that's good. However, I still that does not mean that there is free will. I don't see any evidence in the world for any act of free will.
Sure, but you're using a particular definition of free will.
Well, yes, it's the one that's most common in the world.
Right, but what I'm getting at is what Dennett was trying to do with this is say, what is it that people are actually concerned about that keeps them believing that there's this notion of free will, which we know is not accurate? And so let's see if we can find those things in nature in to the degree that we want, because it doesn't mean anything to say, oh, I want to fly and I can't, therefore I don't have free will. That's a nonsensical kind of argument to have. But what we really care about is human interactions and thinking agents and whether they're acting responsibly, whether there's a tumor that is causing them to climb the tower here at UT and shoot people, or if this is, as far as we can tell, a normally functioning brain. And getting through those things, it doesn't matter whether or not there's free will under any definition. But Dennett is arguing that everything that humans have traditionally cared about with free will exists to a sufficient degree. But if you want to go with your own definition of free will, then I'm not so concerned about what you call it. Do we agree that there are thinking agents who take actions and that we must respond to those actions and have some justification for holding them responsible for their actions?
Yeah, all those actions are caused, and all those actions have effects. I think I could agree there.
Yeah, so I don't really care what you call it or whether you think it's...
So yeah, let's not get hung up on definitions. What is it that we need religion for?
Well, you are hung up on definitions because you're redefining what most people say is free will.
What's wrong with that?
As long as it's
wonderful.
clear.
If you can get everybody to agree with your definition.
I don't have to get everybody
good.
to agree, but you do realize that words don't have meanings. They don't have intrinsic meanings. They have usages, and the usages change over time.
Amen to that.
Okay.
Amen to that.
So there's a movement that is there's this garbage notion of free will, which has been used by religions, and we know to be false, even though people are functionally confused about it. And so what Dennett is doing is arguing for a different notion of free will that would satisfy what their concerns are and be wholly scientific and robust.
WHOO.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so he's rehabilitating the term.
Yeah. It's just like when
Okay,
people used to use gay as an insult or liberal as an insult, and people took it and said, nope, I'm going to wear that as a badge of honor.
Prophet used to mean storyteller.
The trouble is that we can do that without using free will at all.
Yes, we can, except that we haven't addressed the notion that millions of people have, which is fundamentally false. So why not rehabilitate their notion as well?
I suppose we're just talking about means to an end, but I think that in order to change the definition, that goes a long ways, and it might be confusing to various people.
I would never remotely suggest that using a term that people have been using in one way, to use it in a different way wouldn't be confusing. Of course there's confusion. We're not going to fix the world's understanding of free will tomorrow just by handing out Dennett's book.
And I think from our end, when we're using that term, we tend to qualify how we're using it. Maybe not always, maybe not 100%, but yes, there is that potential for confusion. And whenever you're sort of using a non-standard version of the word or not the most popular version, it helps to define your terms.
And I will be the first to admit that I would be okay if we stopped using the term entirely. In much the same way that I don't have any use for the word faith, and I don't see any justification for rehabilitating it. I don't have any use for the word spiritual, and I don't see any value in rehabilitating it. The only difference with free will is that I see a value in rehabilitating the term, because it was used to describe something about human beings, and some fine points about what what was actually going on were wrong. But what it's describing, if you read Dennett's book, is something that's real. The fundamental difference between Don leaving the room or me dragging him out. That's a part of reality.
Yeah, I think I'm an old guy, and my ideas were formed like in 1960 on this. And the way we used to say it then was either you're under duress or you're not under duress.
Sure.
So we just kind of didn't use that Christian term because I feel that it is used by these religionists for the purpose of allowing a punishment.
Well, the thing is, it's not. I'm in agreement with you, but it's not a Christian term. It's used in many religions and in many non-religious philosophical contexts.
That's very true.
Because
other religions too. Yes.
Because in the past we didn't have a sufficient understanding. It was, one moment Matt is standing here talking to you, and the next moment Matt is laying on the floor. And we need some way to describe the difference between those, which is how we come up with the notion of a soul, even though we're wrong. I don't see any reason to rehabilitate the notion of a soul either, because I think it's the most dead concept in all of theology.
Okay, so you don't want to rehabilitate that one, but you do want to rehabilitate free will.
Only to the extent and degree that it actually proves useful. It may be that all of this talk about a compatibilist notion of free will is a waste of time. It could be the case. But as long as there are tons of people who have a notion of free will and who are desperate to face a world where that doesn't exist, I think that educating them about this topic allows them to get rid of the baggage a little easier in many occasions. I don't know. We'll find out in the long run.
The definition that I looked up said that this allows, to put free will with causality. This allows you to have moral responsibility. That's not what gives us moral responsibility, putting those two concepts together.
I agree.
So we don't really have an argument except over this term, and you want to rehabilitate the term. Okay.
Yep.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed your show.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Have a good weekend. Yep. It's one of those things where, I'm not pretending that either I or Don or Dan Dennett has come up with the perfect solution that will fix the world in these things. It's just that from what we see about people living their lives, there are real concerns. There are terms that have been applied to those. And there may, in fact, be some value in rehabilitating those terms, moving them to where they're more scientific in much the same way that we had fundamentally flawed understandings of chemistry. Yes, we got rid of the notion of alchemy being a real thing, but we broadened our understanding. There are some words, maybe we should get rid of it. I'm not completely sold either way.
There's a fair bit of baggage there.
Yeah, I've talked before. If I'm talking about Christianity, for example, just within Christianity, there's 1,000 or a couple thousand denominations, perhaps. And so, if I say something about Christianity and it doesn't apply to you, and you identify as a Christian, that's not my fault, because there's so many people using the same label in the same holy book. And if I'm painting this one and you get paint on you because you're standing right next to him, you should have moved. If you have departed significantly from orthodoxy, you can use a new label. This is something I've said before. And it may be the case that if we alter this notion of free will too much, we should in fact use another label. But the case that Dennett makes, and I'll recommend the book again, Elbow Room, is essentially that fundamentally everything everybody was concerned about is something that is real. And if you want to call that free will, that's fine. But we've got Mark in Canada. I was just in Canada. Where are you located, Mark?
I'm in the Toronto area.
I was just in Toronto last weekend.
Oh, cool. Hi, Matt. Hi, Don. How are you today?
Hi. We're doing well.
That was an interesting conversation. I got to say, Matt, I actually agree with you on this one, because it was my free will to call into the show today.
Great.
I did that of my own volition.
I don't know how you could prove that, but I'll go ahead and take you at your word.
Well, I was sitting here debating with myself, should I call in or shouldn't I call in? And I ultimately chose to call in.
And you won the debate. So what do you got for us today?
The problem actually gets a little more complicated. I'll recommend Sam Harris's book on free will. I'll also recommend the research of neuroscientists that show that decisions are made before you're conscious of it. So free will, I'm fine with the idea that free will may in fact be an illusion and yet still be something. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. What do you want to talk about?
What I was calling to talk about, I've heard you talk about faith, and you even mentioned it today, and that I disagree with you about. That in my personal life experience, it's not possible to live a life in this world, because you can never be 100% certain about anything without having faith.
You don't need to be. So this notion that faith is believing things when you're not 100% certain is a con job. Because there's nothing that we can be 100% certain about. And so
no, but
if there's nothing you can be 100% certain about, then every belief is held in the face of not being absolutely certain. My point is that faith is not a useful foundation or pathway to a good understanding or accurate understanding of reality.
This might be a good time to do definitions.
Yeah.
Okay, allow me to give you a good secular example of what faith would be. Like, when you take a plane somewhere, you have faith in the competency of the pilot that he's going to be able to pilot the plane and you're not going to crash and die.
No. I have a reasonable expectation based on evidence. If you ask me, why do you trust the pilot? I can point to the actual evidence. I can show you his training certificate, the number of hours that he's flown. I can show you the repair
rules,
things on the plane, the maintenance on the plane. All of those things build a confidence level that is proportional to the actual empirical evidence. That is not the same. That is not the same as having faith that there is a God, because you can't back that up.
But for all you know, before he came to work that day, his wife could have broke up with him the night before, and he smashed out of his mind.
Yes, which is why I don't claim to be absolutely certain about anything or that. My confidence is proportional to the evidence, and I can point to the evidence. That is not the same as what people talk about when they say that they believe in God based on faith.
Yeah, we tend to use faith to mean, the thing you might believe in spite of having evidence for it, without evidence for it. And that we think is a negative thing, right?
That was the other thing you wanted to talk about, definitions. My research into what the biblical faith in the original Hebrew or ancient Greek language that it was scribed in actually would translate into our modern day culture as trust or confidence. I place my trust and confidence.
No, so one of the things
my research has showed me.
Well, okay, your research I would say is flawed, because one of the primary verses about faith, it says it is the evidence, and faith is not evidence.
He's referring to a particular Bible quote.
Faith is the evidence of things unseen. That's the verse. That's not the same. as what you're talking about, just having confidence based on evidence. If I ask you why you believe something, and you have good reasons, and you have empirical evidence for it,
we don't need faith.
You
Throw
provide
it out.
those good reasons and empirical evidence.
Right.
Why is it? Because as soon as I ask someone, why do you believe in God? And they say that it's based on faith, they're admitting that they don't have a good reason.
Okay. Fair enough. I have called your show before, like a couple of years ago or something. Let me just give you a little bit of a background about this. I'm not going to go into great detail, but I came to the belief in God because I am a recovered alcoholic criminal. And so all the evidence in my life at the point in time where I came to believe in God told me that I'm a hopeless, lost criminal who's going to spend the rest of my life in and out of jail, because this was the behavior pattern I had established from the time I was a teen until into my mid to late 20s. So against all evidence, against all psychological profiles that were done on me, I believed that I could change my life and I could break free of this criminal behavior.
Yeah.
You know, there's nobody in criminal law that was going to predict your future like that. Nobody's going to tell you that this is how you are and you can't be rehabilitated. That's just,
okay, but
that's
you
a
know how
false
they do
assumption on your
psychological.
part.
You know, they do the risk assessment psychological profiles, right?
Sure.
I
It
ranked,
ends up, Mark, it ends up with a probability. It ends, here, if we take somebody's history and we say, what's the probability of recovery? What's the probability of rehabilitation? What's the probability of recidivism? They're never going to be 100%. So you changed your life and you want to give credit to something that you can't prove.
That's right. You should take the credit for that. I think you're being robbed here.
Okay, but even if I took the credit, I still had to have faith in myself, that because I refused to listen to what this psychological profile about me said, that I was going to spend the rest of my life in jail.
Sure,
But
you can
no,
can have confidence and be convinced that you can change yourself. Do you know why? Because you have evidence that you've done that before. You just hadn't done it on this particular issue.
Right. But okay, all I'm trying to say is that if I didn't have faith, I would have given in to what the psychological profile about me said, and I would still be hopelessly going in and out of jail.
Right, but Mark, you said a minute ago that you had faith in yourself. And what you mean there...
No, I'm saying at the very least, I had to have faith in myself.
Okay,
even if
and
you want
I'm
to
saying that
separate...
at the most you had to have faith in. But the thing is, you had faith in yourself. You had confidence that despite what you were being told, you could do better.
Okay, but I also got to admit here, you can say it's a crutch or whatever, but I did need some kind of external source because everything in my environment was telling me this is where you're going to spend the rest of your life. So
sure, and the same is true for Dumbo's magic feather, but that doesn't mean that the feather was actually magic, was it?
And you may have benefited from the
effect.
Community you got involved with, and you may have had better support and been around people that were leading a better life through whatever reason. And anyway, our point is, it's a big leap to attribute that to God, right? Because a lot of people do this all the time that aren't religious and don't pray to God or whatever. And I don't see any reason to believe in a God. And so how can you attribute this thing to a God that we don't even know exists?
Yeah. So Matt, you don't think that faith should be rehabilitated? You think the term should just be changed to confidence and don't even use the word faith anymore? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, you have a confidence level in something. And there's nothing that we can be absolutely certain about. Fundamentally, and I think you hit it right when you talked about having faith in yourself. You had confidence. And it could be that you might have been wrong. It might have been that you had no real opportunity for recovery and you would have fallen back into your patterns. That happens to other people. It's not different from I lost my car keys and I searched and searched and couldn't find them and I said a prayer and I found them. Now, that prayer could be that there's a magical being that lives outside of space and time who found my car keys for me, or it could have been the sort of thing that calmed me and gave me focus so that I could actually accomplish finding my car keys. How do you tell the difference and determine whether Dumbo's feather is magical or not?
It's like I said, it's like the placebo effect. How do you know if it's something that's happening in our minds or?
Yeah. And so if your reason for believing in a God, you acknowledge, is potentially a placebo effect that you don't have evidence for, that may have been a false catalyst to motivate you, the question is, why would you believe in a God based on that when you acknowledge that it could be something else?
Well, because it could in fact be a God. I could really be in communion with the creator of the universe. I don't know.
How do you tell?
Well, I don't. It produces positive results in my life. So you know the saying, right? If it works, don't change it.
Yeah, but my concern is whether or not it's real, and the thing that you want to attribute it to as working for, we know that it fails elsewhere. So it's like if I've got Dumbo's magic feather and it convinces me that I can fly, the way to tell the difference about whether the feather's real or not, whether it's magical or not, is to put it to the test and give it to others to see if it can fly, not keep going and saying, well, it could be magical, so I'll hang on to it. Put the feather down and see if you can fly without it, and now all of a sudden you'll know whether or not you need the feather. But whether or not you need the feather doesn't tell you whether the feather's doing the thing.
Okay, I hear you there, but the whole thing with me with putting the feather down, like I think of that the ancient Greek mythology of Icarus. I don't want to fly too close to the sun and crash and die because, like, you've heard the saying.
So you're going to keep believing because you're afraid something bad will happen if you stop believing? What kind of God would want you to keep believing based on a fear of what might happen if you didn't?
No, I'm going to keep believing because it's producing positive results in my life, and it's helping me to live a pro-social functional life and stay clean and free of alcohol, drugs, and crime.
Okay, how's that different from lucky socks?
A lot of baseball players swear by lucky socks.
Well, because lucky socks don't wash my guilt and shame away from me and I'm not burdened by.
How does God wash your guilt and shame away?
That's the whole Christian premises, that by what Christ did on the cross, I am no longer.
I'm familiar with the story. I'm asking you, how do you know that that's the case? Is it just because you've convinced yourself you don't need to feel guilty?
That's the other thing. Like, through my whole experience of trying all kinds of different secular therapy processes while I was in jail, self-talk and all kinds of other stuff, none of it worked. But when I started reading the Bible and praying, I felt like the weight of the world lifted off my shoulders. I didn't feel this burden of shame and guilt anymore for these things that I'd done to end up where I was.
Maybe that's a bad thing. If I've done bad things to people, and a book and an ideology makes me not feel guilty, when I really should be making amends and focusing on what I've done wrong so that I can correct it rather than having it magically washed away, maybe that's a bad thing.
No. I'm not saying I didn't feel guilty anymore. I'm saying my shame translated into guilt so I could have the confidence to make amends by being a pro-social functioning member of society.
And how do you know you can't do that through purely secular means?
I don't know. That's like I said, my personal life experience. Like, I'm not pushing this on anybody. I'm just saying this is how it's worked out for me.
Well, do you care if it's true, Mark, or do you just care if it's useful?
Well, of course I care if it's true.
Then how would you go about finding out if it's true?
Well, I have done. I'm not I'm not trying to push this on anybody, man. I went through all kinds of different research. I looked at things like the Dead Sea Scrolls and other things like that, and I've heard all kinds of different claims. But part of my secular therapeutic treatment process, I read this book called Prison Chains Broken.
I'm asking, how would you find? You say you care if it's true, and you care more that whether it's true than whether or not it happens to be useful or beneficial or a placebo. Or
I say that's about 50-50.
What's about 50-50? Yeah, either there's a God or there's not.
No, I'm saying
it's motivation.
For me, if it's true and if it's useful, I'd say it's about 50-50 because...
Oh, so you're not primarily concerned with whether or not it's true. If it happens to be useful, you're okay with the fact that it might not be true.
Sure, because it's helping me to be
So what's your view on the Bible?
my view on the Bible. I take it as the Word of God.
All right. So are you okay with owning slaves?
No, but that's Old Testament stuff.
Well, so the Old Testament is not useful?
I didn't say that. I said
the Old Testament was a mistake?
No, I didn't say that either.
So
that's a whole other discussion and ball of wax and something else we could completely unpack. And
sure, but the point that I'm trying to make is you're willing to accept this because it's useful. What happens if you continue to accept the teachings of the Bible and they come in conflict with what it means to be a decent person, where people can be property and women are second-class citizens to men, or the idea that substitutionary atonement is a good idea, or what it tells you about an afterlife determines how you're going to vote and what kind of world you're going to live in because you've bought into a doctrine that basically says being homosexual is something that is an abomination? Do you think that?
I think everybody has the right to make their own choice, and I really don't know. I know Don sitting beside you is gay. I really don't know what my opinion is. I've seen different studies done on the homosexual thing. Is it
yeah, but the
genetic?
Bible says that if a man lies with another man as he lies with a woman, it is an abomination and they are deserving of death. Do you agree with that?
I'm not the judge. That's not my decision.
Well, that's a cop-out.
The bigger point here is when you open the door to the religion, you bring in a whole lot of baggage that's got a whole lot of negative stuff with it.
It seems that you're just cherry-picking the parts you like and ignoring the things that might be uncomfortable for you. How do you think God's going to look at you when you decided on your own, without guidance from God, about which passages you should pay attention to and which ones you should conveniently ignore?
Oh, I'm not ignoring them. I'm saying it's my calling as a Christian to love everybody and not judge anybody. Whether what they're doing is right or wrong is not my position or place to judge them. I accept them as they are and love them for who they are. And I don't bring any condemnation or judgment against anybody because I'm not God. I don't judge people. I just accept you and love you and try to shine what I believe the light of Jesus Christ on everybody. That's what I do.
Well, I don't understand shine the light of Jesus Christ, but why can't you accept and love people without buying into a doctrine that says you're not supposed to?
I don't see anywhere in the doctrine where it says that I'm not supposed to do that. Everywhere I see in the doctrine says
right, because you're picking out the verses you like. You're not looking at the verses that say you are not to have any communion with non-believers, that the fool has said in his heart there is no God, that there are none of them who can do any good, and that these are people you're supposed to not be in kinship with, and that homosexuals deserve to be killed, and witches deserve to be killed, and people can own slaves as long as they don't die within a couple days of beating them, and all of these things. And the very notion, by the way, let's say, do you think there's an afterlife?
Yeah, I believe there's an afterlife.
Is there a heaven and a hell?
Possibly.
Am I going to heaven or hell?
I don't know, Matt. I'm not God.
Okay.
But
what do you think's going to happen based on your understanding of your religion? Is anybody going to hell? Is Don going to hell?
That would depend on you. I can't say like what you're going to do. I don't know. For all I know.
Do people? Okay, let me try it this way. Do people deserve to go to hell?
You don't. No offense. I'm not trying to call you ignorant or anything, but I don't think you have the right concept or understanding of what hell is.
Well, I asked you about your concept of hell.
My concept of hell is eternal separation from God.
Okay, does that mean that I would just, if I was sent to your hell, am I just floating out somewhere where God isn't?
Well, put it this way. Here, it's an eternal state of fame. So imagine the richest, most powerful person that ever existed, say like Hugh Hefner or whatever. You got an invitation to go to his party, and you refused, and then everybody goes, and then you go banging on the gate wanting in, and he says, "No, sorry, you said no, so out you are." Now you're in a state of shame because you missed out on this, and you could have been there, but you arrogantly refused.
How is it? First of all, how can I possibly be separated from God if God is everywhere?
I'm sure you've heard of the apologist Frank Turek, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, he covers that really well.
I'm not interested in what Frank Turek has to say because I have no more reason to take his word for it than yours or Paul's or Mark's or Jesus's. I want to know what you think. How can if God is everywhere, how can it be possible to be eternally separated from God? There is an answer, by the way. I'm just wondering if you know it.
I don't know. Okay, I don't pretend to know everything. I don't know.
Do you see? Here's the thing: is you bought into a doctrine that you don't seem to know or care much about, other than where it's useful to you.
No. I do actually. I know. Like I've actually read the Bible from cover to cover, and I've studied it, for almost 20 years.
Cool.
So I do.
Then why is it that you don't have opinions on these things?
I have opinions on the things where opinions are appropriate. Like I have an opinion on Noah's flood, for example. Like I've heard your side say that as God is depicted, Yahweh is depicted in the Bible, that he was immoral for flooding the earth.
Well, first of all, I don't think it happened. Do you think it actually happened?
Well, yes, actually I do.
So you think that there was a time when the entire earth was flooded and covered with water?
Yeah.
And that one family with an old drunk and his sons and their daughters and a bunch of animals are the only things that survived and repopulated the earth?
Yeah.
Do you have any evidence for that?
For the flood?
For any of it?
The Mid-Atlantic Ridge, fossils of seashells and clams at the top of Mount Everest, polystrata fossils where there's tree trunks in vertical positions upside down with the roots, and these are found all over the world. The metaphysical evidence of flood myths all around the world.
Wait. I was on board with your evidence, although that there are actual scientific explanations involving plate tectonics, that is how mountains form, which is why you end up with shells there. Also, those other things can be explained by local floods and other stuff. But what the hell is metaphysical evidence?
Oh, I thought you knew what metaphysics is.
I know. I just want to know why you're talking about metaphysical evidence. I'm talking about empirical evidence for something, and
Okay, fine. I won't introduce the metaphysical evidence. I'll keep to the physical evidence. But the polystrata, the upside down trees, and they find these in
you should
all over the world.
You should Google answers to creationist claims, and you'll find talkorigins.org, where actual scientists will point out what's actually wrong with what you're talking about. And it's not it's not evidence for a global flood.
See, what you just said, this is a problem I have. Like, why does a secular scientist, why is his PhD any more valid than a creation Christian scientist PhD?
Because one of them is based on science and the other one's not.
Okay, but they both went to an academic place of study. Like John Lennox, for example, he got his PhD in mathematics from Cambridge University. So why is Stephen
you
Hawking's
can't prove
PhD?
God with mathematics. You see, what you find is that these people who have advanced degrees don't have science to back up. I don't believe what Richard Dawkins says about evolution just because he has a PhD in biology.
Look up Kent Hovind's PhD.
I accept what Dawkins says because of the evidence behind it. This is the thing: is you are focused on a cult of people. Oh, well, this person's a scientist and they said so I'm going to take their word for it. I'm believing things because of the evidence, not what some scientist said, or just the fact that somebody got a PhD from somewhere.
Okay, what about David Berlinski, who's a neutral? He's an agnostic. He wrote the book The Devil Delusion in rebuttal to Dawkins' The God Delusion, and he says that Darwin evolution is not it's a hypothesis, a scientific hypothesis at best, not even a theory.
Okay, he doesn't understand Darwinian evolution, which, by the way, is not what in evolution by means of natural selection is a way to explain observations. We have mountains of evidence for common descent, including Francis Collins, the Christian former head of the Human Genome Project, acknowledges that even if there was no fossil evidence, the chromosomal evidence enough for the fusing of chromosome 2, for example, would be enough to support the idea of common descent.
Okay.
So this is an unusual call, and I apologize because we're probably going to move on. But
all right, that's fine. I appreciate the time.
You called in to talk about faith, and seemed to agree that it probably wasn't a path and that you had faith in yourself and then you had reasons for it and now you're onto the science and you believe in a flood, I find it strange that you can deny the fundamental facts about science that are some of the most attested to scientific findings in history, particularly biology. And yet you can't tell me about your own beliefs about whether or not you think people are deserving of hell.
Well, like I said, it's just an eternal separation from God. Like,
how can you be separated from God who's everywhere? You think about that and call us back another time. Thanks, Mark.
Okay, bye.
The answer, by the way, if he's still watching, is Annihilation Theory, which is something that Billy Graham ascribes to. Basically, all of us heathens would cease to exist at the time of our death, which I guess means I'm right if I don't believe that there's an afterlife, at least for me. But this notion that heaven is like a Hugh Hefner party that we just didn't submit our invitation to is nonsensical. Because
the whole thing is lost in me. Huh?
well, I mean, look at the model. There's a God who creates everything and sets up the rules for everything and plops you down in a world and tells you to use your brain, essentially, gives you a brain by which you figure out what's going on in the world. And this is the same thing you would have to do with regard to evaluating whether or not a God exists, and we don't see sufficient evidence for that. And the only way that we can be, even hope to pretend that we have evidence is to deny reality, to deny the fundamental understanding that we've learned about reality from science. When basically the only science that theists reject is whatever science disagrees with their religious teachings. Mm-hmm. And now you've got, a God who came down to earth and incarnated himself in human form to serve as a loophole for rules that he created. And he really wants you to come to heaven. But you can say no. And if you say no, then, he'll just make you cease to exist when you're dead. Please explain what the purpose of this entire thing is. Doesn't God know?
Oh, but you can't understand his miraculous and mysterious ways.
Yeah, but I mean, doesn't God know whether or not I'm going to hell? And if he knows, why did he make us go through all this tap dance and not just put us where he wants us?
There you go.
I don't know. Makes sense to me. Zach, I have no idea where you're calling from because there looks like a weird...
Is this Indiana?
Is it Germany?
No, this is from Idaho.
Idaho.
Hagerman.
Oh, okay. There's a slash in it, so I thought it said Hag/German ID, and who knows? Hagerman, Idaho.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. I've been listening for a little while, seen some of the videos and stuff since about probably 2013, 2014. This is the first time I've called in.
Okay, what do you got for us?
I think that the idea that faith cannot be a valid mode of knowledge is, I guess I disagree with that idea.
Is there anything that you couldn't believe and attribute it to faith?
Is there anything that I couldn't believe and attribute it to faith?
Is there anything that one could not believe and just attribute to, I'm taking this on faith?
I guess not.
If that's the
I'm
case,
not sure.
Could somebody believe something that is false and attribute it to faith?
They could attribute it to faith.
Sure. So if somebody says, I believe this, and their attribution is faith, how do we tell whether or not it's true?
I don't think we can as outsiders. I don't think...
I'm going to take it on faith. I'm going to take it on faith that when I let go of this bottle of Coke Zero, that it's going to fall to the table.
Right.
It's either going to fall or it's not.
Right. I'd say that that's not something that's taken on faith generally. But I mean, if somebody says they're going to take that on faith, we don't have any mechanism for determining whether or not that's valid. And
sure we do. I can let go if it falls. That's how we find out whether or not something is true, by investigation, not by faith.
Right. That's through evidence.
But Matt's earlier point is if you can believe anything on faith, then it doesn't give you a guide to what's true or not.
Right. Well, you could believe everything on faith. I think that we're using faith in two different terms here. when a lot of believers talk about faith, they use it as you guys have described, and as I've heard other callers sometimes describe, as evidence for things unseen, that sort of thing, and just take that on faith. But I want to look at it in a slightly different light, like as sort of as another sense experience or another possible sense experience.
Okay, the problem Zach, the problem we're going to run into, and I'll let you do this, but now we've got two different definitions of faith, which are fundamentally different. One you're going to describe as a sense experience, and the other one is belief in the absence of evidence.
Right, and I think that the two are often confused, and I think that they're often. I think that often people use it in that way.
Zach, why call a sense experience faith if faith is used in another way, and we already have the term sense experience?
Because I don't think that's. Because I think often when people hear the word faith, sometimes they can think, evidence, reason for belief in the absence of evidence. And other times when they hear it, they can think this sort of other sense experience of possibly spiritual realities.
What is this sense experience, and how do you know that it's real?
Well, the same way we could know any sense experience is real and is as valid as any other sense experience.
Cool.
To the person who has it, it's a valid.
Not cool at all. You just said we could validate it the same way we would any other sense experience, and we validate no other sense experience by merely taking the person at their word that their understanding of a sense experience is. It's independent verification that validates the reliability of senses.
The idea of an ESP, and that's been well tested and found to be bogus.
ESP, sure. Yeah, I agree.
So
with
how
that,
does this differ from ESP?
And I'm not talking about the explaining it to another person, being able to have some sort of shared belief in something.
How do I distinguish this from a mind game?
Then I am absolutely not interested. I'm not interested in claims to personal truth. Truth is truth. The way we validate things is by independent confirmation, because the person who is suffering from delusions, who we have to lock up, they have what they're going to call their personal truth. If we're not going to care about the facts about a shared reality, I don't know why we're wasting time discussing it.
Okay, let me ask you this. If 90% of the world is blind and 10% saw, would it be valid, or even less than that, say 1 in a million or something like that, we're able to see?
Okay.
Would it be valid for those people to claim that they had knowledge of something that the others didn't? Not to convince them, not to convince the blind people, but for the person who believes it, or for the person who sees, would it be valid for that person to say he sees?
Well, first of all, I'm not keen on using the word valid here because it has a specific meaning and logic. But can they be Can they be rationally justified in believing that they can see? Yes.
Right.
And the blind people can be validly justified in not believing it until they have evidence.
And they can engage in particular with other people who can see to validate that they're seeing correctly. And this is something that you can teach and demonstrate to people who cannot see through empirical evidence.
You can demonstrate, things like being able to perceive things at a distance and things like that. You can't explain color to a person who can't see. There's no.
So first of all, I'm not convinced that is true. What you're getting to is this notion of qualia, which there's something experiential about it. There's something that we can describe and demonstrate. For example, I can identify color blindness in people, and I can find out who's not colorblind, and we can consistently demonstrate that some people are not colorblind. It doesn't change if the people who are colorblind are totally blind. The way to demonstrate this doesn't change. It's about being able to consistently produce results. Is this possible using the faith, sensus divinatus, whatever it is you're getting to?
Probably not in the same way.
Then why are we talking about it? because you've said that you weren't interested in whether or not other people believed it, so it becomes a matter of personal experience and personal truth. And yet when we talk about these other senses, we're talking about independent verification and how we might demonstrate it to somebody who doesn't have those senses. And we pointed out already that those things are possible with other senses. So what is it about your special faith sense that even remotely compares to the things we discussed?
I have to say, like with colorblind tests, and stuff like that, there's no reason for a blind person to, suspect that a person actually can see color or that a person can't.
Yes, there is. There's the evidence for it.
We could render a spectrogram into Braille, for example.
Here, there's a cool experiment with a tribe. They can see a distinction between two different colors of blue that I can't see a distinction between.
Yeah, the tetrachromatics.
Yeah. I'm willing to accept that they can see that distinction because the evidence consistently demonstrates that that's the case. I don't have to be able to see that distinction to be convinced reasonably that they can. If people of faith, even if they want to consider it a sense, wanted to, if their faith was a path to truth and understanding, first of all, we wouldn't have thousands of denominations all appealing to faith. But if they wanted to demonstrate reliably that they have access to some truth that the rest of us don't, that is at least theoretically possible. And yet it doesn't happen. What we get is varied revelations that are in conflict.
Okay, well, we could imagine, a sense experience, maybe not color, but I don't know, some sort of sense experience that can't be, independently verified.
Okay, first of all, we can imagine whatever the hell we want, but if there was a sense experience that couldn't be independently verified, how could you ever have warrant to trust it? How is it distinguishable from a delusion? If you can't independently verify it, it is indistinguishable from a delusion.
Okay. I guess that's true, but I mean, if we have, so you're saying that if we had those kind of sense experience, if people actually had those kind of sense experiences, they would, they would not be able to, they would not be rationally justified in actually trusting those experiences?
Yes, because, for example, if I see a vision appear in this room and I'm the only one who can see it, I have to question my own sanity. I have to question whether I'm seeing a vision or whether my brain is playing tricks on me. And if there's no way for me to investigate to determine if I've actually seen something real or if I've just perceived this, then I cannot have evidential warrant to believe that I saw it. I can believe that I had an experience because I did. I mean, that the properly basic thing is that I had some experience. But whether or not my mind's understanding of that experience maps to something about reality, that requires independent verification.
I see. All right, then.
That's why we end up locking. That's why we end up locking people up, because there are some people who experience strong delusions that, to them, based on the reports and the studies, are as functionally real as almost anything else they experience. And yet these things are not perceptible to the rest of us. We've identified, in some cases, problems with the brain, but in some cases we don't know why. But we do know that they're dangerous, and so we put them in protective custody.
I see.
So, I mean, for example, if God talks to you, and people say God talks to them all the time, and I usually ask, do they hear it audibly, or is this a feeling or an impression or something that happens in their brain? But in all of those, if God talks to you and tells you something, how can you be sure that God spoke to you and that this wasn't just a creation of your brain?
I don't have an answer for that right now. I'm going to have to. I'm going to have to consider that and call you guys back next week.
I'm reminded of when you go read about comic books and Spider-Man gets a special power of some sort. Then the first thing he does is he tries it out a bunch of times and makes sure it's real. And then at some point he starts to use it and starts to benefit by it and starts to go off and do things. And the fact that he's out saving the world or whatever becomes evidence that other people can see. So
Right.
That might be.
I mean,
that might be a path.
Right, but I mean, if Spidey had some sort of sense of something that, I don't know, how is happening beyond the observable
Spidey has the
observable universe.
Spider-Man has Spidey sense, the sense of danger in a number of the comic books. And the way that we know that it's reliable is he consistently finds the danger that he sensed.
Right. Because
if any
there's actual, you can compare it to other senses in a respect. You can validate it by appeals to things that happen around us and things we can affect.
Yep.
Right, but beware of confirmation bias.
I'm in complete agreement. I just need to, if there was some religious sense, it would need to have some demonstrated reliability and a
that would be
mechanism
step one, right?
by which we could confirm it. And so far, I've got nothing.
Okay. All right.
Thanks, Zach.
That's I guess all I had. If I'm going to think about what you guys have said and possibly call back.
Sure. Thanks, Zach.
Bye.
As a reminder, anybody who wants to, atheist or atheist-friendly person who wants to join us for dinner, we'll be going to Star of India. We're on the air for another 20 minutes or so, and then we'll be heading over. You're welcome to join us. It's fun.
Yeah.
When I hear these things, in religious philosophy, there's this thing called the sensus divinatus, the divine sense. It essentially relates to getting direct revelations from God. And what some people, Zack didn't do this, so I'm not going to fault him for it. What some people will talk about, he did start to go down this road of, hey, there's 1 in a million people who aren't blind. Those people can verify with each other, but he seemed to imply that they couldn't verify to anybody else, and that's just not true. Let's say that only Southern Baptists are actually getting information from God, and that information that they get from God, with God being perfect, is accurate. That would be easy to demonstrate. Right. Most of these religions think that prayer, intercessory prayer, is useful. And yet we've tested it. And intercessory prayer works at the rate of chance, or I should say doesn't work at anything better than the rate of chance. It's exactly what you'd expect.
Yeah, they wouldn't need tax breaks. They could just go win the lottery every time they wanted some money.
Not only that, but if there was a single Christian denomination, or I'll just stick with Christian, if there was a single Christian denomination that had access to the truth and the power of God, the world would be fundamentally different. This would be easy to demonstrate. Either there's a God that interacts in reality in some demonstrable, detectable way, or there's not. And if there's not, I think you'll find that the world we live in is exactly what you'd expect if that God doesn't exist. People have asked me to defend the hard atheist position that there are no gods, and I will do it with very specific definitions. But the book that I'm working on is fundamentally about how this world is exactly what we'd expect if there is no God. We would expect confusion. We would expect people who believe things but cannot offer evidence for them. We would expect people making appeals to special ways of knowing that they couldn't reliably demonstrate. We would expect conflicting revelations that tend to agree with the person and the biases and the prejudices that they have. And we would expect, if there was a God, for a God to perhaps step in and correct all this. Hang on a second, you guys have got it all wrong and this shit is important, so let me get you the correction. But if we live in a world without a God, that doesn't happen. As far as I can tell, that doesn't happen. Mm-hmm. We've got a buttload of atheists online. Yeah, pick somebody, I guess. Sure. Frank's been waiting in Dallas for the whole show and then some. How you doing, Frank?
Hey, Matt. Hey, Don. How are y'all doing?
Hey.
Pretty good. I might be getting a little sick, but it could just be hot in here.
Well, I'm sorry to hear that.
Well, there's a way to test it, so I'll be fine once I actually test it.
So I promised the Ustream chat I would give them a shout out if.
Why?
I know, because they're all such nice folks, especially the moderators.
Yeah, I haven't. I couldn't say because I haven't been in Ustream in years in the chat at all. But go ahead. Let's talk about something relevant.
So my question is, and it's probably going to be boring, but I just need some clarification on an issue that I've had discussions with theists about, specifically Christians, and it's the topic of grace. And
that's what you say before dinner.
Right. It's that plus more. I'm thinking.
Yeah. Fundamentally,
and with your background,
all grace means is this is a gift from God. It could be roughly equivalent to mercy. It's something that you don't deserve and you couldn't achieve on your own, and yet God will grant you. This is a dispensation.
It's like a presidential
type of
pardon.
Yeah.
Well, actually, that presidential pardon issue is the one I'm specifically talking about, because the conversation that I had with one particular Christian was about morality and how, to me, the morality of Christianity seems a lot like a carrot and stick version of Santa Claus, like a bigger carrot and a bigger stick, obviously, but still, you can't morally justify that kind of system. Where the ultimate result is really all you're living your life for.
Yeah.
But that was kind of pushed aside, and we got into this topic of grace, and I'm not exactly sure how those two issues connect within kind of the framework of Christianity. How does one get out of
I'm not sure what they meant. I'd kind of have to be a party to that conversation. It's much in the same way that when you try to discuss anything we've discussed today, as a matter of fact, free will, faith, souls, whatever, everybody's going to have a different tact. And so you really need to push the person who's raising these things to tell you what they mean.
Yeah, and you're sort of trying to determine the mind of God, and if there is a God, nobody could figure that out, and if there's not a God, then it's a pointless exercise. So it's like, how do you know that there is such a thing as grace, and how do you know when it's given and under what conditions? And it's all just make-believe as far as I can tell.
I guess my problem with the whole concept is that it's so difficult coming from a perspective that doesn't believe in the stuff to have even a sensible conversation when the definitions aren't even agreed to, and not even agreed to, much less understood by both sides. I mean, your previous callers have been great examples of this, where Christians say that the way they use faith a lot of times is different than the way that atheists say.
You want to know what's worse?
Attribute to them.
You want to know what's worse? Go into
Yes.
any church and conduct a poll on what each church member believes grace to mean.
Yeah.
They use the language. So it's almost that there's no fundamental significant meaning to much of the language within religion, because all they really need is a gist. Oh, these people around me are experiencing the Holy Spirit. What the hell does that mean? How does it manifest? How can I know? Is it goosebumps? Is it, the hair standing up? Is it a feeling of euphoria? Is it all of these things? Is it different for different people? All they know is it's in my best interest to act as if I understand what this means, and I think I get it just well enough for me to, sing praises and be convinced that I'm one of the chosen ones. And the truth is, most of them couldn't explain to you why they believe what they believe, or a good explanation of the history of their church, the history of the Bible, how we got from A to B, and how doctrines have changed. I go to church, and most of them just think, God's real, Jesus loves me, that's all I really need to know. The rest of it is window dressing.
Wouldn't that lead to the conclusion, though, that there's really no point in having any discussion? Or, I mean...
No, because you get to point this out, and there are people who can understand that they're engaged in sophistry.
But to your point, I think that if you are talking about grace, you may have ceded way too much territory. Maybe you need to back up and say, why do you think your God is real? Why do you think we should believe in the Bible? What about all these atrocities? And was Jesus anything more than a rabbi? And these sorts of questions. Those would be more sort of getting toward the ground, right? Of the fundamentals. So I think if you're talking about grace, you've maybe let the weeds grow too far.
At a minimum, you can have that discussion about grace, but you've got to have it with them, because I can't tell you what they mean by grace.
Fair enough.
Yep.
And, well, Based on what you said, Don, I think you guys are doing God's work, given that you're having these discussions, and you're able to sometimes penetrate the elasticity of people's beliefs. Because I mean, every turn that I make, there's usually some dead end that we reach, where somebody's able to justify something or rationalize something, and it's just so hard making any headway.
All I can tell you is that it does work. It doesn't work for everybody. People do, in fact, change their minds. Like I may never change the mind of somebody I'm actually talking to, but people watching.
Right.
But
people change their own minds. Don't go into it with the idea that you're going to change somebody's mind. Go into the idea that maybe you can learn something. Maybe they can learn something.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the conversations are useful because everybody can learn something. You can get a better understanding of what he means by grace or she means by grace, so that you can then, when you go on to have a conversation with somebody else, say, hang on a minute, this other Christian had this notion of grace and yours is a little different. How do I tell which one's real? And those conversations that engage in Socratic method, where you're asking the questions that are just obvious or seem obvious to us, they're definitely not obvious to them, which is why Zack and some other honest callers say, hang on, that makes sense. I'm going to have to go back and think about it and call you back.
Well, and Matt raised an interesting point, is that even if somebody can rationalize all their viewpoints, the next guy is going to use those terms in a very different way. And be aware that a lot of these things are so squishy that they can kind of mean whatever they need to mean.
Yep. And on that note, Frank, I'm going to let you go. We're going to try and get to a few more callers who are on hold before we go to dinner, but I appreciate it.
All right. Good luck, guys. Thanks.
We've got Tom in Kirkland. Thanks for waiting.
Oh, hey. I didn't expect y'all to actually get to me.
Mm-hmm. I didn't either, but here we are.
Okay. I've been to Kirkland.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
It's a nice place.
Yeah, it is.
Kind of like the woodlands of Houston to Seattle. Anyway, I came in around the tail end of y'all talking about souls and free will and afterlife and stuff. And it kind of reminded me of a moral question I had rolling around, and I wanted to know what y'all think from the perspective of ex-theists and people who deal with theists.
Okay.
All right. So I pause from time to time, make sure people can hear me.
Sounds like you're going to put us in you're going to put us in the position of playing the advocate of the Christian.
Sort of, kind of. I know that Matt was an ex-Christian,
right,
and y'all deal with theists a lot more than I do.
Okay. So what's the question? And I'll see if we can understand it.
So, assuming the kind of typical free will, the person is in charge of their actions, there's not really any sort of materialistic determinism, and that when you die, your soul either goes to heaven to be happy forever or goes to hell to be in pain forever. And when a person is born, it is up through their life, it is up to their free will whether or not to follow the correct religion. Therefore, there is a very significant chance they will end up in hell forever. The alternative would be not having this person, and they would not be able to be harmed by their non-existence. And I'm wondering where
is it moral to bring a life into the world knowing that the consequences are more likely negative?
Yeah. I'm reminded of Andrea Yates, who in Houston, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 years ago, killed her 5 kids, drowned them, because she was terrified that they were going to reach the age of reason and potentially go to hell. And she thought she was doing them a giant favor by killing them. And I think her theology was spot on, although she's completely crazy and right, needed to be committed. But yeah.
Well, the answer to your question depends entirely on the religion in question, and they're not all the same. So the moral evaluation is going to differ. But a lot of religions, including Christianity and Judaism, solved this problem ages ago. God told you to be fruitful and multiply, therefore it would be immoral to not bring kids into the world. That's their loophole for this, and that's the same reason that the Catholic Church, for example, declared that suicide is a mortal sin to prevent people from committing suicide while they're in a state of grace to get to heaven. You have to plug these loopholes, and you do it with doctrine. Now, from a secular perspective, you could ask the same question, though. Let's assume that we live in the universe and there's no God. Is it moral to have kids? And that question is entirely dependent on the facts of the world. It may be different for different people at different times in different places because, do we have enough resources to continue? Is the population growth too extreme or less? Is the world that we're living in, on the verge of collapse and there's absolutely no hope? Or does having kids propagate the species and hopefully gain us new information such that we might continue to understand the
right.
So there's no easy answer even under the secular notion.
Right, and I know that. I ask myself that question almost constantly.
I don't ask myself that question almost constantly because I can't have kids. So it's just because I'm not. Yeah, for me it's a non-issue. For other people, oh well. I'm going to try and get through some more calls, Tom. I appreciate it.
Oh yeah. Have a good one.
Thanks. Gerard, are you there? Thanks for waiting for way more like the whole show.
Thanks. All right, real quick. Matt, you said before about you asked the question, how can God be separated if he's everywhere?
Yeah,
it was
really. Go ahead.
Yeah, I found that to be a really bad question, or at least a question with a really easy answer.
Well, I mentioned that it was a rhetorical question because of annihilation theory.
Yeah, but even that seemed to make some mistakes about the question itself.
Well, because if God is everywhere and I continue to exist, then it's impossible for me to be somewhere that God isn't.
Well, is that what separated means?
Yes, that's what
we assume.
The point is, it is impossible. It is impossible for me, if God is everywhere, it is impossible for me to continue to exist and be separated from God, which is how annihilation theory came about, because of that impossibility.
What does separated mean, though?
Not with.
Okay, now is that a spatial?
Well, we don't know.
What difference does it make?
With a lot of theistic claims and uses of words, it's all word soup because it doesn't have any grounding in reality,
well, no, I think
and we can't test it.
Separated here has a really easy.
It means
just means not being able to observe or not being able to experience God. And
how is that possible if God is everywhere?
Because he could take away your senses. Yeah, that's one.
Yeah, that's how we get to annihilation theory. You take away my senses, I cease to exist.
Yeah, but does that mean you cease to exist, though?
Yeah, it does. I'm no longer experiencing anything if my sense is gone. What is your question? Because it seems like that you want to just piddle about semantics.
No, it's not semantics. It's a
semantics are important. I just
saying that. I think there's a lot of metaphysical problems I think there are a lot of problems with metaphysical arguments between atheists and theists, and this is one example.
Except that I don't agree that this is a problem, as I just pointed out, that under normative uses of separation, even your solution, which is, God could just take away your senses, in that case, I don't exist. Sense experience is the function of existence. What does it mean to...
I don't agree with that.
Can I finish the sentence? What does it mean to exist if you don't experience anything?
Relate to stuff.
What?
I have a weird definition of existence.
I can't understand
you. If you can relate... Oh, sorry. If you can relate to things, then...
Can you come up with a particular usage of the word separate under which there's no longer a problem? Of course, because you can make the word mean whatever you want. Is that use consistent with what the authors intended when they wrote this?
I personally don't know what the authors intended, but I know that people seem to have that kind of those kind of concepts of being.
Sure, and it's interesting, and we can sit here and argue about different ways to define things such that it would become a true statement, but only if we're arguing within the context of it already being true, and I care whether or not it's true.
Mm-hmm.
I think sometimes a mistake that atheists make is they bend over backwards to try to make sense of the gibberish coming out of the religious believers' mouths. And
I don't think it's gibberish, though.
well, I don't know, separation
I
from
think it's a
God.
pretty clear definition that they use, and you're just not seeing it.
Okay, what is the pretty clear definition that they use, and who is they? Because there's thousands of denominations. Which ones are you picking out for the very clear usage you want to say should be obvious?
Well, it's not so much that there's a clear definition that you can recite, but
Name a denomination. Name a
I'm saying-
denomination whose doctrine is consistent with your usage, and then tell me why I should give a rat's ass.
I'm saying you had the question that you had was a poor question because it was poorly worded with the separation. It's not a good, and it has metaphysical ways of being answering it. That's like not that hard.
How can you tell if my question is a poor question if you didn't understand the purpose of my question?
I don't understand the purpose.
Did you? Did you know that the purpose of the question was to get to a discussion about annihilation theory?
Yeah, but then I said even with annihilation theory, there's still a
Cool, watch another show. Michael and Espinito, you get to be the last caller. Thanks for waiting.
Hey, how you doing, guys?
Good. Evidently bad. It was a bad question to expose someone whose theology was so muddled that they had no understanding. But, maybe he'll call back in and educate me further.
I see. No, so I just wanted to basically ask you guys, your show has helped me come from a theist to a deist to now an atheist, and over a couple years. So my question, though, to you guys is, I still sometimes get this lingering feeling that something's there, So my question is, did you guys ever have that? Does it go away? How do you deal with it if you did?
I've never been a theist, so I don't have that feeling. Is it a good feeling or a
What
bad
about you,
feeling?
Matt?
I can't say whether or not it's going to go away for you. I know people who underwent fairly serious indoctrination who 50 years after they no longer believe, they still wake up with nightmares of hell. I certainly have moments of wonder and doubt where, hey, is my understanding of the world accurate? But I never have a feeling that there is a God or some fear that I'm wrong, because my position is pretty simple. I do not have sufficient evidence to believe that there's a God. And so I don't see reason to have any sort of existential doubt about that, because I know I'm being intellectually honest. I know that if I had evidence, I'm not going to sit here and do a show for 13 years where I keep pointing out that I don't have evidence.
Yeah, I mean, I accepted Jesus into my heart 4 times because I thought once wasn't good enough when I was a kid. They really scared me there.
Well, maybe it'll take
stick, huh?
4 times of acknowledging that you don't have good reason to believe I don't know.
No, definitely. Your guys' show has helped me so much. I mean, you guys talk about so many things that just makes me think in such a different way, and a clearer way, a way that makes sense. I have
thank you, but you've done a lot of the work yourself.
Oh, thank you. I just have one more question for you guys, and that is, I found myself having conversations with theists and Christians and whatnot, and some of the things that I bring up, some of the things I've heard on this show and whatnot, I find the majority of the time these people get really upset and really angry. I mean, obviously you guys know you have the show here, but how can I go about talking about some of these things to people that believe, and kind of see if they can think my way a little bit without getting so angry?
Take a break.
Take a break.
Say, let's do, I'm not here to upset you. I just want to find out what you believe and why, and explain, for example, why I don't agree. And if it's upsetting, we can stick a pin into it. We can both go off and think about what we've said and come back and continue. You don't have to do it all in one dinner.
Yeah, I think Matt's point is that if you're on emotional territory, then you may not be able to make progress, because a lot of folks will dig in their heels and things. Another thing to say is, when you start challenging people's fundamental assumptions, they often feel threatened by that, because they may not have, you may be asking questions that they realize, hey, I should have been asking this all along and I haven't even thought about it. And it's maybe embarrassing.
Yeah, that's almost what I've kind of come to the conclusion that's the main thing.
Mm-hmm.
But then I'd like to progress with these people and see if they can kind of eliminate that for good reasons, you know?
Well, so the thing is, I know you'd like to progress with those people. You have no idea whether or not that's possible with any given individual. So the best thing you can do is be honest and compassionate, have conversations, stop and pause the conversations, realize that, for example, I could walk up to somebody and say something and they don't change their mind. Don could walk up and say the exact same thing and they change their mind. Is it because they'd already heard it once before? Or is it because Don is fundamentally different in attitude? Who knows?
No, it's mental state.
Both, yeah.
Just think that you may be just planting some seeds, and you're not going to necessarily convince somebody.
Yeah.
One of the bigger things that, and this is something we've talked about many, many times, and I'm going to let you go, Michael, because we're going to go to dinner, but I'll close with this. I appreciate the call.
Okay, cool. Thanks, guys.
We talk about being out as atheists because once you realize that the neighbor across the street who you've had lots of conversations with and that you like and they seem to be a decent person is a godless heathen who you've been vilifying in church, or as a homosexual who you've been vilifying in church, or as some other suspect category that you've been vilifying in church, that sets up a massive amount of cognitive dissonance. Here's somebody who I like. Here's somebody who I love. Here's somebody who's valuable to me. And so we need more and more people being open and out about who they are, what they believe, what they don't believe. Because the truth is, atheists, humanists, homosexuals, whatever category you pick, they're the people who pick up your trash. They're the people who do your kidney transplant. They're the people who go to your PTA meeting. They're the people who watch your kids. They're the people who bring you, clothing and stuff when your house burns down. This applies universally. We need to focus on the fact that we're all human beings. And instead of saying, oh, I know what an atheist is because some jackass in the pulpit told me that these are the evil people who want to kill babies and destroy God's country, if you actually get out and you meet people and find out later that these people who you know to be good are in fact in some suspect category, secular, humanist, atheist, whatever, that fundamentally changes how everyone, including believers, even if they never change their mind about a God, it changes how they have to interact with the rest of us. And that is how you change the world.
Yep.
You can change people's minds about God, and I'll try to. It may be a little easier to change people's minds about specific doctrines, because there's already thousands of denominations where they can still cling to their God and yet be okay with the gays. We're going to have a gay church that loves Jesus.
Do less harm in the world.
There's lots of different approaches, but the best thing we can do is to continue to be out, be good, be worth knowing, and care. On that note, we're going to call it a day.
Amen, Brother Matt.
Hey, head off to Star of India if you're here in Austin, 2900 West Anderson Lane. Thanks to everybody who showed up, was on the other side of the glass, and especially to the crew on the other side who's getting ready to put their names up for making the show happen. We'll see you all next week.
This is Russell Glasser, host of The Atheist Experience. You know, The Atheist Experience is made possible by volunteers and the generous support of viewers like you. If the promotion of positive atheist culture and separation of church and state are values that you hold, please consider contributing by becoming an ACA member or visiting our product page at evolvefish.com under the Partner tab. Thank you.